Hello, welcome to one thesis video. Um, I'm your host, Mikka J. Lehtonen, and I'm joined here today by Laura Niemi, who is currently a concept designer at VR Group. And it's not virtual reality, but Finnish rail. What is the formal
I think
English?
in English it's Finnish, the National Finnish Railway Company. So trains in Finland, in short.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
in 2019, you wrote your thesis titled, If You Can Think It, Why Not Design It? Study of design thinking practices and challenges in three large Finnish companies.
Yes.
So, congratulations once again. It's a fantastic thesis, and I'm happy to have this chat with you today on your thesis, actually, how to frame your thesis.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Great to be here and great to talk about it after a few years. Had to remind myself a little bit of what went on with it a few years back.
So could we start, Laura, by if you could tell a bit about where you did your thesis, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, perfect. So, like Mika said, it was in 2019 then when I did my thesis, or started it a bit before that as well. It was a bit over a year long process, if I remember correctly. And um, like mentioned, it was in design thinking, and I wanted to study how these like design centric and design tools, how are they used in like companies that are not in the field of design per se in Finland. So in the scope of the thesis, I picked three large companies in Finland who are in the more maybe you could say in traditional fields, or fields that don't maybe necessarily touch with design, or they're not design agencies or anything like that. And I wanted to see how those
Hmm.
companies have been using design, and how the um, design way of thinking, design thinking has been implemented in those. And obviously then also like how did that go, and what were the challenges, and what were things that made it easier to implement it.
Hmm. I mean, thanks for sharing, Laura. And like, I think like what's sorry, what's really fascinating is that um, how clearly and like in a detailed fashion you're able to kind of describe your thesis, right? It's a kind of really neatly packaged thesis, right? So like, and this is something that like I've come across before as well, that it's not an easy task.
No.
When you do research, like how do you frame it, right? So like how did you end up choosing this topic, and did you have any alternatives in along the way?
Yeah, so I was studying in Aalto University in the business. I was a business student. Oh, yeah, I am a graduate of the business school in Aalto, but in my master's, I was studying in the International Design Business Management program. And in the program, as my major, we focused a lot in like service design and customer centric way of thinking and innovation management and all those kind of, I would say, like new forms of like how management should be done in the future, and how product and
Mm,
innovation management should be done in the future. And
yeah.
in that program, I think design thinking was kind of this topic that came and went a little bit, but it was this kind of idea that includes a lot of elements from these other fields. And to me, it felt really interesting to kind of learn more about it, and so I could also, in a way, learn more from the other fields as well. So that was kind of, I was interested in it, and that's why I wanted to go and dig a little deeper in it in my thesis. But it's actually interesting, like you were asking if I had like any other alternatives. So yes, I
Mm,
actually did, and I had to dig my memory a little bit, because I think it was in the late 2017 actually when I first had my first thesis workshops. I was playing around actually with this idea of making or studying in my thesis like positivity at workplace, and like kind of having positive outlook and positivity in workplace, and how that could maybe impact employee well-being and like the overall performance of the company. So I was kind of, that was
mm,
my very first draft idea, and I was thinking if there could be interesting study that could be made from that. But actually then I pretty quickly shifted from that, because I started to think, okay, what is a topic that I want to be a professional in the future? And what is a subject that I want to know a lot, and kind of hopefully also teach others in my employment after graduation. And
Mm.
from there, I knew that I want to be part of this like innovation or design processes in commercial companies. So from there, I was thinking, okay, maybe then this design thinking and learning about these elements would be useful in that path. So that's kind of how I shifted to this like topic that I then eventually went on with.
Ah, okay, okay. So like not so much about positivity,
Who cares? No, no, no.
Yeah.
Those who personally know me know that I am an advocate for positivity and like having this positive outlook. But maybe I
Sure.
kind of realized
Mm.
that that's maybe something more geared towards HR, which is something that
Mm.
I had been thinking like earlier in my studies that I could be interested in. But in the end,
Yeah.
I was more interested in this like creating new services, new products, innovation management, that path. And for that, it felt a bit more clear to have the design thinking as the like a theme for the studies.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I have to say, like, I really like how the way you kind of frame it based on you kind of wondering what is happening in organizations. So like not so much about I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it
Hmm.
sounds a bit that you went to the field to understand what is going on, and then you looked into kind of what has been written before, like from an academic perspective. But like,
Yeah,
how
I
was it?
think, yeah.
Hmm.
Go on, sorry.
No, no, I'm done.
So yeah, exactly that. I think well, to start off, I think it started from me. I was curious about this, and like I had this hypothesis that okay, like I want to work in the processes or like processes of company or design of the company or like product management side of the company and what is useful there. Okay, design thinking could be that. And then I had this idea that okay, this is like an interesting topic. Let's see what's happening on that field. So I think it kind of started from internal curiosity and interest, and then the next step, like you said, was that I kind of went to like explore like basically what's been written about design thinking. So starting with very broad, like just the design thinking keyword, and looking all
Mm,
kinds of like, obviously there's lots of academic literature written about it, but it was also interesting to kind of see what's people writing about it on LinkedIn and in like these different blogs that are not maybe academic but more on the managerial side and kind of on the like field of the companies. So I kind of
mm,
started from this very wide range of okay, what's going on, like what's being written about, and then I kind of started to make this very loose, like a mind map, or like kind of pick these patterns that okay, this is a topic that's very much discussed, this is another topic that's discussed kind of relates to the first one, and kind of from that building this like okay, this is like where the existing literature is going, and these are the like common threads, and these are the people who are like mentioned in other people's papers and all that. So then kind of on the next part, and that's obviously like you can go on that as long as you want
mm,
because there's so much literature to be covered. So I guess
mm,
at some point you just have to reach that certain saturation point that okay, now I just have all this like mapped, and let's see what's the outcome. So then I kind of just looked at that, and I kind of framed it so that okay, these are the topics that are now discussed, these are kind of how are they linked. And then I started to on the other hand write these like questions that came to my mind that okay, like this is interesting, this is research, but what is like this question that relates to it, but it's not, there's no answer to that yet. So kind of trying
mm,
to figure out these like unanswered questions, or questions that are just I didn't come across in the research, that are related to those but are not yet part of it. And that's kind of how I started to form the idea that okay, these are maybe areas that could be still explored and how could benefit the overall discussion on the other side. And then kind of
mm,
just forming these paths that okay, this is known fact, this is a kind of known fact, this is an interesting open question, and then picking those paths and make it like selecting the most interesting ones for the thesis. And obviously lots of iteration over that, but
mm.
I think that was the base kind of structure that I followed.
And that's really like that's super fascinating, Laura. And then combining that with your kind of career aspirations, like what you mentioned before, which I found super super interesting, right? So
Hmm.
like so yeah, so like I think it's like um interesting to hear. So how is your thesis relevant at the moment in your career, or like the things you learned during your thesis writing?
Yeah, I think the way you worded it the second time is maybe more accurate. So because I have to confess that I digged through my I found my thesis and I took a look at it beforehand for this chat, and it was quite interesting to kind of reflect back. And I realized that even though like obviously like at least for me like the theories and like these like names of the people who've done research and all that, like those when you're writing the thesis you know all of it, but then later on over
Mm,
the years that those might be things that maybe you don't remember as well. But like the content and like the actual substance of the thesis is something that I found that, oh, like this is actually what I'm now working on, what I'm doing, which is really like nice to realize that like I
mm,
am now like working on the things that I was studying for my thesis. But yeah, it is very relevant. Like you mentioned in the beginning, I'm working as a concept designer in the passenger services of this Finnish railroad company, and we work in the sense that we create this like, or my job is to create like business concepts for new products and services. And obviously how do we do that is that we want to obviously include the user and have this like very like design thinking driven method in it.
mm,
So
mm.
in a way, it's funny. Like the people I interviewed for my thesis, they did very similar things in their organizations. So now I'm on my way to become one of them, if you will. But I think
Wow.
besides like the knowledge that I learned and like this kind of, which I think is always when you're digging into it deep into a subject, you gain knowledge, even if it's like something that you know from your memory and something you just kind of know in deeper in yourself. I would say on top of that, I think the biggest support was to talk with these people that I interviewed for my thesis and kind of learn that, especially on the like challenges front, that there are like these shared challenges in different organizations. So you kind of, when I encounter them in my own work, I kind of have this feeling, okay, there's a problem, but it's not the problem that I'm alone with. That there are other people
Mm,
who've had these problems and they've managed a way around it. So there's kind of this nice feeling of, okay, like this is what they were talking about and how they kind of gave ideas that how we could tackle it. So that was maybe one thing that's I didn't maybe know how to, like I didn't think about it much back then when I was doing the interviews, but now later on I'm kind of looking back, okay, it was really helpful to hear that. But it's also the same on the
wow.
positive side. So like we were discussing, or in the thesis, there was like big sections where I wrote about like what are these like aspects that can help companies implement design thinking in organization, and there were like these different tips or like good ways that other people had felt that worked in their companies. So it's very like satisfying now that when we've had like a problem and then kind of I've taken a book, like a page from the other people's book, that okay, this is something that in this company worked, maybe we try it here and it works. It has this nice idea that, oh yeah, this is like a common, like a common help, and not just in that or company but in my work as well. So maybe
Mm.
it's kind of like a like the knowledge and all the like actual substance of the study, but then also like this maybe like a shared kind of experiences and having this knowledge that other people have these same struggles and also same like ways that work for them.
Wow. Okay. That goes really like. Actually, I have never thought about that, but it completely makes sense, right? Kind
Hmm.
of situating yourself in relation to the participants that you interviewed and everything. Wow, that's a gold nugget. Uh, and I think like like everything like this has been like super interesting to hear your thoughts on framing your thesis and like how it reflects or how it has kind of brought meaning into your
Hmm.
career. So would you be like so like what kind of advice would you give um, for people writing their thesis? Like
Hmm.
how would you frame your thesis?
Well, first and foremost, like stay like fighting. It's hard work, so like you just have to push through it. And obviously like the beginning can be the most difficult part sometimes if you don't know where to start from. But maybe like three things if like that worked for me, like, well, number one, like kind of like ask yourself like what is this area where you want to be an expert in the future. At least that worked for me. Like what are
Mm,
topics that interest you, or what kind of topics do you see yourself wanting to work in the future? So like what is this, like what do you want to do, maybe even if it's a bit broad sometimes to think. But I think it really
mm,
helps that if you're working on something that you feel will be helpful for you or you feel is interesting to you, I think it's always easier to kind of in the research to kind of think more, like have more varied points of views and kind of push through the whole process as a whole, I think. And then maybe as a second point, like I described a little bit for how the process went for me, I recommend that you start from wide and shallow search, and then you iterate into a smaller scope and more depth. So you don't have to read thousands of like papers like completely in the beginning. So you can just kind of start by building a big picture. Okay, what's discussed and what's academic and what's not, like what are other sources and what's going on, and there kind of
Mm.
build the big picture and then kind of try to find the niche that you want to go for, and then really like dig in deep in that, like read the papers most relevant to that goal. I mean, obviously, like I guess from the schools recommend you to read as much as possible, but I think that's just the way in the
Yeah.
beginning it's easier to kind of manage the whole thing if you have this more maybe a practical approach, that you really focus on the like the niche that, like find the niche that you want to do and then focus on reading as much about that and around that as possible. And then maybe as a third point, I would recommend giving like visualizations and like drawings a chance or a try in the process. Like I know, at least in the business side, thesis is always considered like this, that you just type thousands of pages, or maybe
Mm.
not thousands, but like thousands of words, like really long pages, just typing and typing in Word. But for me, it
Yeah.
really was helpful to kind of have this maybe a bit more visual start, especially in the beginning, of like visually draw bubbles that, okay, this is a topic, this is another topic, how are they linked, and kind of maybe draw a storyboard or something for your like the actual structure of your thesis. Like for me it was really helpful to do that in both the literature review, which can be very like intimidating big chunk in the beginning, but like having this kind of idea of where do you want to take the reader from, like what is the first subject and where do you want to go and what are the kind of questions that lead you from the first point to the last point. And also the same I would recommend do the, for the whole thesis, so the literature review and then the rest of the thesis. So from visualization, I think it's easier to kind of then start typing the actual words. And
Mm.
also like it's nice if you want to keep the visualizations in the final thesis, because it brings like a nice breath of fresh air from all the text.
No, absolutely. I mean, thank you, Laura, for sharing. And if anyone is interested in checking out the visualizations in your thesis, if you can think it, why not design it? Study of design thinking practices and challenges in three large Finnish companies can be downloaded. And I will make sure to send or share a link underneath. But
Great.
Laura, thank you so much for this chat.
Thank you and good luck on the thesis. You can do it.